Hey, Scoot here, back with a new episode of Scoot Talk Sports. I was lucky enough to chat with Jeff Paulus, current technical director of Edmonton Scottish United SC, head coach of the Northern Alberta Institute for Technology, and the former head coach of FC Edmonton in the Canadian Premier League. We discussed his love of sports from childhood, which ended up turning into a lifelong career. Really excited to share this conversation with you. Small apology, as the quality of my microphone during this interview isn't as good as where I'd want it to be. If you are using Spotify, quick reminder that you can find a Q&A section to provide your feedback on episodes. Other than that, let's get into Scoot Talks Sports, episode 11, and I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here on Scoot Talk Sports. Been looking forward to an opportunity to chat with you the last few weeks, so I'm really happy you were able to make the time for it. So thank you very much for hanging out with a random Canadian podcaster here.
Well, thanks for wanting to talk to a random Canadian coach. So there you go.
There you go. So a lot of us are familiar with your time in the Canadian Premier League and in a few other places, but I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to chat and talk a little bit of your roots in the game and those sorts of things. So the first question I have is, when you were growing up, what was your first memory of sport? Was it football? Was it hockey? Was it something else? And what do you remember about that?
Yeah, it was hockey. I was 4 or 5 years old, quite young. My dad was an avid hockey fan, as I think every Canadian was 50 some odd years ago. I remember going down to our local rink, Broadlands ice rink. It was an outdoor rink, had all the kit, very first day. I've never been on ice before. They put me in all this equipment, basically armor. And I go on the ice and I can't move because I've never skated before. I was freezing cold. I couldn't skate. Didn't really do much for about an hour. I came inside, took off all my stuff, had a hot chocolate, and looked at my mom and said, I don't want to play this. And that was it. That was my first and last experience with ice hockey. Yeah, so there's my first sports memory right there.
That's, you know what? It's very typical, though. You get dressed up, dragged out to the outdoor rink, right? And it's sort of some of us look forward to coming back in for the treat, and other of us look forward to get back out there. I was kind of in the middle, so I totally understand that.
Right.
Did you have a sporting hero when you were growing up as a kid? Did you have like an athlete that you looked up to?
You know what's really funny, actually? It might when I was really young have been Brian Budd, because of I don't know how old you are, but we used to have these. There used to be this competition, and it was the athletes from different sports, and they would compete, almost like in a decathlon, and they would find the best athlete. He would win as a soccer player, and he became kind of my hero for that. Yeah, random, but it was because of watching this, every Saturday. I think it was every Saturday afternoon it was on, or something along those lines, and so that became it. And then I think being a fan of Toronto sports teams in general, being a Torontonian, growing up, with the Jays, of course, and their World Series wins, and the Blizzard many years ago, the original, Toronto Blizzard, and then. Anyhow, that was probably it. And of course, all the ex-Leaf stars. And I wouldn't say I really had one specific.
Yeah, I mean, that again sounds very typical for a Canadian. You're all over the place with sports. It's whatever's close by, right? When did you get into soccer specifically?
At 6, about the age of 6, really young, elementary school. And we had a family moved here from Scotland. Well, moved to Toronto from Scotland into my neighborhood, Colin Groves. And he had 2 brothers, but they were, of course, soccer players, and that's all they knew. And so him and I got on for whatever reason, started kicking a ball together, and that became my sport because they played it. And that became my sport from that day forward. That was my start. That's a family moving here from Scotland.
It's interesting, those connections, right? The remembering kind of those kids' influences as you're growing up. So was that before, I guess, you got into St. Andrews or Woburn or some of those kind of youth clubs?
Yeah, it really was. And then I started off at Wexford, just in the house league program, which they ran. So their grassroots. I went through there, and I was very fast as a kid. You wouldn't know that now by looking at me, but I was very quick. I would do track, 100 meter, 200 meter. And because of that, I was a left winger. I was also left footed. And someone identified me playing house league and brought me up to a competitive program, I think at the age of about 12 with Wexford. And then there, I was never a top player, but I was quick and could get down the line and get a ball in. And I was tenacious and quite physical and very aggressive. So I always had a spot on somebody's team. And then I just kind of went through different clubs. St. Andrew, as you mentioned, Woburn. Those clubs don't exist anymore. Wexford still does, which is great. Maple Leaf was another club, a good club that I played under. But yeah.
So it's always interesting doing a little bit of research and finding all these little community clubs or soccer clubs that may have existed. As we know in Canada,
Hmm.
there's always kind of a little bit of a, I don't know, cycle or rotation for some of these things, especially in the past. But
Yeah.
being able to remember those things, that's very cool. You gave yourself a very good scouting report too, I have to say.
Oh,
Tenacious, quick.
yeah.
I'm ready
There
to
you
sign
go.
you right now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there might be a few teams in the CPL right now that could use that.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Speed's always a winner, that's for sure.
Mm.
So, personally, it's always tough to find kind of information on Wikipedia, but I did see that you went through high school and then you kind of made a decision around school. Did you join the military or did you go to Dalhousie first? I couldn't really figure that
Military.
out. Military,
Yeah,
okay.
military. So I wanted to be a soccer player, but again, I wasn't a top player, not a national team level player, not even a professional level player really. But I love the game, and I went to Seneca College more so I could keep playing soccer at least at the collegiate level, go on from there. And but I got injured, a few game, really one game in my first game actually, and I got injured, and I didn't see out the season. I realized I wasn't there for school. I'm just there to play a game, so I quit, and that's when I decided to join the military, get out of Toronto, get out of everyone's got different paths in life and, different groups that you hang with at periods of time. And it was a good time for me to leave Toronto because maybe my environment and certainly some of the people I hung out with was probably a good thing for me to leave and get away from the environment that I was currently in, where I didn't have soccer or school. So I did that. My grandfather was in the Navy, in the Canadian Navy, served on the Haida, which is actually the ship museum that's at Ontario Place. So that's a bit of history there, kind of cool. So that's kind of what made me join the military. And that got me out to Halifax. My first warship, of course, was the Fraser, an old minesweeper, or sorry, not minesweeper, a sub hunter. And then I got onto the new frigates, the Halifax and Charlottetown. So that met my first wife there, but decided that military life wasn't for me long term. Started going to school, Dalhousie. My first year was online. It's University of Manitoba, actually. They've got a great online program that the military is a partner with. And then realized I love school again, which I hated when I was young. So that led me to get out and go to Dal.
Where you were in the military
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of what that experience would be like. Not only playing some sports and I think you were managing or coaching a little bit when you were
Yeah.
there, but also working your butt off probably all the time
Mm-hmm.
and on these different deployments. Do you remember playing? And we always talk about this because we see it on those Canadian Forces ads. But did you ever get a chance to play soccer on the top of the ship, or were you on a ship that even had space for that kind of a thing?
Yeah, well, I was on a frigate, and the new Canadian patrol frigates that actually came out during that time. Halifax was the first one. We had a flight deck, so you could play basketball on there and in calm seas, or when the ship was alongside, you could pass a ball around. We didn't on ships a whole lot with a soccer ball, but you could certainly throw a baseball, play a bit of basketball, and we would do that for sure all the time on a ship actually. And yeah, but a lot of my sailing was North Atlantic, and you
Pretty
wouldn't want to
cool.
be on the upper decks in the North Atlantic. Yeah, and just and crazy rough seas. But I loved it. I loved the military experience. I loved it, and it's very much like a sports team because you're on a warship, and you've got to support each other, and the warship will only, especially if you ever got into a combat situation, but the warship's only going to survive if 230 men are working together, and men and women. My ship was all men, which is why I said that. But if you're working together, it's just the same as a soccer team finding success. So for me, it was very much leaving a sporting world into, yes, a military world, but very much the same kind of characteristics and qualities and individuals that you needed to find success. So yeah, it was good for me. And then on the leadership side is really what the military gave me and what led me into having a really deep appreciation for coaching and wanting to become a leader in things that I do in life. So I can thank the military for that.
It's always interesting hearing those connections and what you take away from some of those moments, right? Especially years later
Right.
when you look back. So you then went and took a degree, I think, in history and sociology at Dalhousie, correct? And
I
then
did.
after that, you ended up going and taking a Bachelor of Education at Arcadia.
Acadia, yeah.
Yeah.
Great
And then,
school. Yeah.
so you'd say you loved learning. It definitely shows, right?
Mm.
And then I think you
Hmm.
finished it up with a master's degree in business administration. So talk about, a lot of education and life experience kind of in those years for sure. Was there anything that you really loved about any of those schools, like in terms of the three that you kind of went to, or what kind of drove you to go to each one? So history, sociology, education, and
Hmm.
then business admin.
Yeah, so Dalhousie, Bachelor of Arts, that I went there first actually because I wanted to pursue law and I wanted to do environmental law. And Dalhousie was their law school was the first law school to introduce environmental law, the only school in Canada doing it. So I wanted to go into law school initially. and go that route. Didn't work out because of my LSAT, but I also didn't want to, keep waiting and waiting. I wanted to, because by this time I was probably, when I graduated at Dal, I was around 30. So I wanted to, get into a career here. I was doing some coaching in the military. I was doing coaching for a local club, Halifax County United. I loved that part of it. I loved what I was able to give back to the game as a coach. And so then I thought, teaching is coaching, and coaching is teaching. So that led me into that education route then. So Acadia has a fantastic education program. I was able to get into there right away. Delight. I love it. So there are different schools. The house is a big school, and of course a very historical school, beautiful campus, beautiful buildings, but you're quite anonymous at that school. Acadia is much smaller. It's in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. It's a small town where half the population are students. Just a great vibe, great experience, really good people. I was an assistant bar manager there as well. So at night times I got to work I was running the university bar and having a blast with that. I felt like Van Wilder, being, the oldest guy at the campus, but having a lot of fun. So yeah, really good. And then it was actually, with FC Edmonton during the NASL days is when I started my MBA. When I was doing that, and I'm still doing, I'm not quite finished that yet. I've taken a break just because of the workload, and a couple of the courses are crazy hard for someone that's not a math person. But I wanted to start doing that for the leadership. An MBA is there's some very good courses on leadership and management, and this is why I went that route. It really has no benefit to my career path at the moment. I don't see myself getting into business in any capacity where the MBA is going to be a selling feature of why you would hire Jeff Paulus. But for me, it's just about, we ask whether I'm teaching, which I'm teaching again part-time while I'm still doing a TD job at a youth club. But, we continuously ask young children to keep learning. We continuously ask players to learn. And if we're not doing that ourselves, then it's almost hypocritical. It's almost, we think we know all the answers. So education is a big part of who I am, because I think that makes me, what's the word I want to use there? I think it validates my belief in wanting others to learn.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes total sense. If your leaders are saying you got to learn, it's a lifelong commitment, and they're sitting back and not doing anything, then yeah, absolutely, it's something that students or players especially will notice, right? So so jumping kind of back into your coaching career, I guess we'll say, your move to Alberta, you kind of talked a bit about that there with the business administration studies, but what brought you out to the Northern Alberta Institute for Technology when you first decided to move out there? Was it the coaching position or life, or?
It was, my current missus is upstairs right now, so I don't know if she'll hear me or not, but I'm in Alberta because my first wife was a nurse in the military, and she was posted to One Field Ambulance, which is right here just outside of Edmonton. So that is what got me out here.
When you first moved, did you have plans when you got out here, or was it sort of following along with the wife and then kind of see what will happen?
You know what? I was fortunate because I was just finishing up my education degree at the time. And so we came on a house hunting trip. I still had to do one semester. I think it was 10 weeks I had to do of my final practicum to graduate. So we found a house that was in St. Albert, where I currently live, the city I currently live. And just down the street was a high school, Paul King. And so I popped in for a visit, and I asked if I could arrange my final practicum there so I could get out to Edmonton sooner. And they agreed. And without knowing me, they let me come in and do my practicum there. And then, so that's really, so for me, it was, the opportunity to work as a teacher, first and foremost. That was going to be my life. And they accepted me. They offered me a full-time job right after my practicum. So it worked out really well. I think I was here for maybe 4 weeks, and then I went down to St. Albert Soccer Club and had an interview for a coaching job for U14 boys. Graham Wood, Kevin Jones, and Dave Underwater were the ones that interviewed me. Graham Wood to this day is still my mentor. He's one of the most fantastic people in soccer that I've met, certainly in my time, most humble, and he became a big part of my success in the game in this province. Kevin Jones is the principal of the school that I teach at right now, and who still is the president of St. Albert Soccer to this day. So my ties to that club are incredible, and the importance of it. So I just, again, I think I've been very fortunate by coming out here and some of the opportunities given to me.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it just taking what life offers you, for sure, right? And it's very interesting to hear those things, especially the fact that you're still connected with some of those guys, including your mentor, right? It's those connections mean so much. So when did that Northern Alberta Institute for Technology job come up? Because of course I'm gleaming as much as I can from what's available on the internet.
Yeah, so Nate, so again, it's amazing how your life works out, and the different paths that everybody's going to take. And and I'll get into this later maybe if it comes up about how I eventually made it into the CPL. But I think that what I always believed, and my background in the game of football and my growth in the game is so different than, say, a Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s or a Stephen Hart's or a Rob Gale. Mine is every Canadian coach's maybe dream a little bit, because I didn't play pro. And I came through the Canadian system. I don't have an accent, and not saying that accent. I'm not blaming those guys for that. Trust me, they've all deserved what they've gotten for who they are. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean. In Canadian football, many years ago, the accent was your ticket in for sure into the highest levels. It meant that you knew more. But Nate was important. So I moved into St. Albert. I went down to St. Albert Soccer. I had an interview. I said Graham Wood was on that panel. Graham Wood at the time was also the head coach of Nate. So I had a summer season with St. Albert. We had a lot of success with this U14 team, and a lot of success in just developing players and bringing a group of players together. Graham watched a lot of this. He recognized that. And I still remember it was the end of year awards banquet for all the coaches. They gave me a little award for, I think, Coach of the Year that year for the club. And that night, over a couple of pints of Guinness with Graham, he offered me to be his assistant coach at Nate. I was Graham's assistant for 2 years. And then it was time for him to step down. He'd been there for many, many years, and he was stepping down and they offered me the head coaching job. So even getting Nate, because Nate really kicked off my career and gave me a chance to work with higher level athletes and older athletes in a really serious environment. It was just really good fortune. I mean, we bought a house in St. Albert. I went down to the club and asked for, a volunteer youth job. And then next thing you know, I'm coaching a college team, 2 years later. Really, but yeah. Good fortune.
Couldn't ask for it in any other way, right? It's just one of those things that ended up lining up. So
it did.
You became the head coach as listed. I think it was head coaching manager, whatever you want to call it. But you ended up winning a title in October 2011. What was your memories of that title season, and what made that team as good as it was?
Yeah, incredible. That team still gets together and celebrates as often as they can. At least once a year. They do. I missed this last one because I was sick with COVID, but a special team, a special year. Nate, so we built over the 6 years that I was head coach at that program. We became a powerhouse in Alberta. I think we only lost 6 games we only lost 6 games in the 8 years I was involved. It's league play. Only 6 games we lost in my 8 years I was involved with Nate. In the final 7 of 8 years, in the provincial final, lost some provincial finals probably shouldn't have. But the year before, what made this one special was the year before, we made it to the final against VIU. And amazingly, it was James Merriman's dad who was coaching that team. And I'm not sure if James was on the team that year or quit the year before. He might have been on that team. We lost them in penalties. We had them 1-0 up. It was right at the end of regulation. It was about the 93rd, 94th minute. The whistle was about to blow. We had a free kick just on our side of half. And we're yelling at our defender just to kick it into the corner. I should have just said, play it back to our keeper. I made a mistake. There's a massive coaching mistake by me, but anyhow, we didn't kick it into the corner. We kicked it straight to their keeper's hands. He ran out, drop kicked it as far as he could. That same defender missed it on the bounce, went over his head. Their striker went in and scored. Put the ball at half, put the ball at center circle, ref blew the whistle. So now we're going to extra time. We lost that game in penalties. Heartbreak. And we had a great team that year. So the next year, we were right back at it. A lot of the same players. Just we had so much depth and we had so much quality. And Thiago Silva was a player, came over from Brazil, who was just an absolute standout all-star. If the CPL was around when Thiago was on Nate, Thiago would be playing at the CPL. We had about 5 or 6 players on Nate that would be CPL players had it existed during that time. Dominant program. And then so when we won it in 2011, that was 2010 we lost the final, 2011 when we won it, we were just a dominant side, strong in every position. We lost Thiago to a ridiculously brutal challenge that was intentional in the semifinal. He wanted to play in the final, came out in the final, still played against everyone's advice, but the physio cleared him at the time and said if he can deal with the pain, he can play. So he went in, did what he could, but still just his influence, seeing him fight it out. It turns out he had a broken foot, and he played on that in the final game. We didn't find that out for 6 weeks after we were home. And that was just a character of the team. He was one piece of that. Just guys like, Kyle Saban, Zach Kaiser, Austin Berry, just so many players that were of quality. So that's why it was so special, and for us, it was just for 8 years, we were so close to be able to win almost every year, and to finally win it after it was our 7th year was great. And the final year we made nationals again, but it's just not the same group. We lost our center backs to injury. So my final year, 2012, was difficult because we got knocked out. I think we finished 6th at nationals, and and then that's when I left for FC Edmonton. But yeah, I love Nate. I'm back there again. They've just handed me the men's team again, so I'll be back coaching Nate men starting this September. Yeah,
That's
everything's
very cool.
coming around full circle. Yeah.
Great memories, and now an opportunity to create some new memories. It's incredible sometimes what these athletes will do to get out on that field. Like you mentioned, a broken ankle or a broken foot. That's not easy to play on. But...
No, I mean, we had Adam Artazzi was on that team, Milan Roberts, players that played for me at FC Edmonton. So the team was just, we were stacked. We were so good.
So while you were coaching at Nate, I think you were also working in the Prairies National Training Center as well, a little bit.
I was.
So you were working with players between 14 and 17, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about what that program was about?
Yeah, that program was across Canada, set up by the Canadian Soccer Association. And so it was basically in every region, you would take the top 14 and 17-year-old male and female players and you would train them, 2 to 4 times a week. Ours was twice a week on field and twice a week in the gym. I'm not really sure what we used the gym for, but that was the program. Yeah, Sean Fleming was running that. He was the director of the Prairie region, so in charge of Alberta, Thomas, Saskatchewan. And then my first 2 years, I asked if I could come in and watch what they do. They had Sean Fleming running it. They had one of the best soccer minds I've ever come across in Bert Goldberger, as far as his knowledge of the game and tactics and team. And so for the first 2 years, I seriously sat down and watched them run sessions, help clean up soccer balls at the end, pick up cones at the end, to do my part to, as a thank you for letting me kind of really get a 2-year education for free in soccer and coaching. And then my 3rd year I was hired on as a staff member. So that was a thrill for me because, again, I'm just this kid from Toronto, that loved football and really loved the leadership aspect of coaching and was always intended to coach. I enjoy it, love it, always have, but on a volunteer basis. So then you start getting some of these jobs that you don't expect and working for Nate and getting paid and being in an NTC and getting a bit of money from Canada Soccer to do what you assumed you just do for free for the rest of your life. And so a highlight of my career was that program. And then plus you're working with great players, 14 to 17 years old and top athletes. So that pushes you because now you have to be ready. And those kids will suss out if you're not up for it. So a lot of stress came with that. Especially my first session, the stress around my first session with those players was through the roof, as you can imagine. So yeah, great experience. And I'm still thankful for that. And I'm still thankful for Sean providing me the opportunity.
It is very cool to hear about how a lot of it is that you show up, right? And maybe you're not there to get paid. You show up, you're consistently there to help out, and those opportunities end up coming your way. So I think you worked with them until 2011. You won the title with Nate in late fall, I guess, 2011. When did the FC Edmonton opportunity start to kind of come about?
Yeah. So again, it's amazing the opportunities that some people can be afforded based on situations that you've, again, either been fortunate to get or worked to get or whatnot. So of course, because I was coaching the college team and I was at NTC, so I was getting to know more and more people. I'd worked for the provincial association as a provincial coach for about 3 or 4 years. So just getting to know more and more people. When FC Edmonton started, it was Dwight Loda Vegas that was here, their exhibition year. I remember going for a lunch with Dwight Loda Vegas, Joe Petroni, and Kevin Passant, who I work with right now. Kevin's the executive director of Scottish and on the TD there at the moment. So we went for a meeting because Kevin and I were both working together at the Edmonton Scottish Major League Men at the time, which was a top amateur men's side in the region. And Joe had brought us to lunch to see if we'd be interested in starting up an academy and what would that look like, and is that something we'd be interested in? Well, Dwight ended up leaving that year to Japan, and so that connection was kind of lost. And then so was all the talk about the FC Edmonton Academy. I was also at the time when I was teaching at Paul Kane, I was running their academy for the school, and I was running it. So in St. Albert, we have this little community rec center. I think a lot of across the country has these things now with the pool, and we had a couple, because it's Alberta, so we had rinks for indoor soccer. So we had a couple of rinks that we played indoor soccer on. I was running a session one afternoon with our school team, and I see this fella looking through the glass, this older Italian gentleman, Joe Petroni, who I knew of. I didn't know him well. I had one meeting with him, but I didn't know him all that well. But he was watching through the window, and he waited for me. So I came out, and he had said he was just chatting with Graham Wood and Paul Kelly, who were there having a coffee, and they had suggested he come and talk to me about starting the FC Edmonton Academy. And he says, I've just been watching what you've been doing there. You look organized. And it's funny today because, I mean, I had cones down and I had players in pennies and we were playing, so that looked organized, great. And that kicked off meetings with us, and so I thought, yeah, why not? This is something I never in a million years thought would ever come to someone like me. So I took the opportunity, and I wasn't ready for it. I can say that. But again, I think that you have to take a chance on yourself sometimes. And I did that. And that's how it started. So next thing I know, I'm on a leave of absence from school, which the school board gave me 4 years to leave of absence to keep doing this. But I was on leave of absence from school. I start this academy. I'm working for Harry Sinkeloven and Hans Schrijver, the two, coaches of FC Edmonton, both Dutch A licensed instructors for the KNVB. I mean, top football people. And here's this, little old me and terrified. And but in that 1 year, the education I received from those two, things that I did, that everyone did locally, and we all did it because that's the way it's always been done or whatever it is. But they challenged me in so many things that I was doing and that I was doing poorly, quite honestly. And they would challenge me on this. I never had answers. I'm like, well, that's because of what everyone does. Okay, well, everyone's doing it wrong then. They were very blunt about that. And so that year education fee was massive. The first month was the most difficult, uncomfortable, humbling experience of my life. Just getting none of it right, quite honestly, but persevering. And that was really what got me in the door. So again, circumstance, the benefits of, knowing Graham Wood and Paul Kelly, who sent Joe my way. That's how I got the job.
When you first jumped in there, where was it, you were just working with the academy, or were you also coaching the senior squad a little bit as well?
So I was expected to also be at all the senior squads training, as I'll loosely say as a second assistant, because there was times where the three of us would be standing together and those two are talking Dutch, and I don't speak Dutch. So, second assistant, maybe, I guess if I wanted to go out into the public and brag about something, I would say that, but maybe not so true. I was expected to be there, and that was great because, again, that's also a free education for me. So I took it that way. Yeah, it was an interesting year. It was, again, I think my growth as a coach, though, really kicked off with those two. So even though there was moments that were uncomfortable for me, I think I'm so thankful for that. But
so did you travel when they were in the NASL with the senior squad? You remember some of those ridiculous flights that others have shared with me?
So that year, yeah, the only time I traveled that year was for preseason, and we went to Arizona, Casa Grande for about 2 weeks. That was the only time, but that was great because I got to see what a professional team did for a 2 week for a good portion of preseason. That was exciting for me. That was a good experience. After that, though, I didn't travel. It was my job. I was at home, and any players that didn't travel would come to academy sessions. So I was coaching first team players with the academy on those sessions, and that's tough because you're dealing with, pros that are pissed off that they're not traveling because every professional player thinks they should be on the top, as they should. And so that was tough, but good, again, for my growth and being out of your comfort zone. But I got to know all the players that way. And I was always the manager that would, like to put my arm around a player. That's why, this day I don't mind saying at the professional game, I'm a better assistant coach than head coach, I think, because of my personality. But yeah, I didn't get to travel. Now, they both got let go. They both got fired at the end of the year. And then Colin Miller was hired. And then I became Colin's, first assistant. And at that point, then I was now just a coach on the first team, still directing the academy. I had coaches that I hired to be on-field coaches, but I still did a lot of the on-field, even though I still go and do on-field coaching. But yeah, then those ridiculous road trips you're talking about, I experienced far too many. Yeah.
It was something that anyone who's ever played for the FC Edmonton team that I always had a chance to talk to, those trips, there's no direct flights from a lot of those places. It's a lot of hopping.
Oh, no.
It sounded a little nuts, that's for sure.
Yeah, they were nuts, honestly. Oh my, we had 10-hour layovers. I mean, we were getting into places like Carolina at 3 a.m. because of delays and flights at different terminals going through. I spent more time that year. I probably spent more time in the Denver and Chicago terminals than I spent at home. That's what it felt. It was crazy. It was crazy. But NASL was a great league, a really good league, really good players.
It's what I've heard from everyone is, the one side's travel and then everything else positive. Had a fantastic time. Loved playing. Lots of great memories. But then, of course, the NASL ended up kind of going. I guess bankrupt would be the right word, but the league failed. And in that time, between kind of FC Edmonton existing in the NASL, and then the eventual inaugural season of the Canadian Premier League, what were you busy doing in that time with FC Edmonton? Was it just the academy?
Still doing the academy, and then, but also to help offset the cost for Tom, my local club, St. Albert, they didn't have a TD at the time. So what I did was I worked out an arrangement where I would come in, and during that, it was about an 8-month period where I was the TD of St. Albert Soccer. I came in and helped set up some programming, working with a good friend of mine, Chris Spadell, who's the executive director there, and doing the academy for FC Edmonton as well. Yeah, it was busy, but it was good. We didn't know. Initially, I didn't know if Tom was going to come back or not. And then I still remember getting the phone call that he was in and that I'd be his manager. So but it was an interesting time of unknowns, what was going to happen for me.
It was interesting just from a third party standpoint to see the commitment in keeping that club going and in keeping the academy going. Mm-hmm. And while they didn't have a league to really put the senior team in consistently, right? So did you have a sense of that Canadian Premier League coming? Did you hear about kind of that development? Were you involved in discussions around that, or was that something that
I wasn't
purely when you got the job offer?
So what I can say is initially I had no idea. I mean, I was as informed as anyone else out there on social media, I guess, or hearing things through the grapevine. Even Tom was pretty tight-lipped about it. As it started getting, once the rumors started getting pretty heavy about FC Edmonton at that point, and that's when I did meet with Tom and we discussed it, and then I knew he was interested and he was serious. And this was probably about 2 months before we officially launched as a team, before we had our kind of thing on White Ave and announced that we were going CPL. So yeah, but no, I was like everybody else. Yeah, this is no one believed it. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things where if you can easily look up on Wikipedia more failed soccer or football leagues in Canada than you would, successful ones, right? So it's always one of those things where people
absolutely
probably question it first. But obviously you did end up getting hired as the FC Edmonton manager, the head coach, as well as the general manager for that inaugural season. What was kind of your big takeaways from that year? Obviously it didn't go as well as you'd hoped, but what was that season like? And what was it like jumping into a league that was just starting? Like, it must have been a lot of things on the fly here and there.
That was, it was interesting, that one, that year, I think. So I came into it feeling enormous pressure. And I felt that because, of course, everyone knew, FC Edmonton has existed. We weren't a new club. We're not starting from scratch. We have a history. And we in 2017 or 2016, we had a very, very good NASL season, making it to the semis, losing to Indianapolis. And there was a lot of belief here. But I think I took too much of that pressure on, that we have to be the best team right from day one because we're the only team that actually already exists. So I wore that. Then I combined that with wanting to be true to who I was. And I was always a believer in the young Edmonton soccer player. I always believe we had good players here that just never got the same opportunities as they do in Ontario. So I wanted to really showcase players here, which is why even some of the senior players I brought back in were, had been they'd left Edmonton many, many years ago. I wanted to bring them back. Like Randy, for example, is a player I wanted to bring back in and build a team around. I would say that with the pressure of having to be the best team or being expected to be the best team from day one, combined with a complete misreading of the level of play in year one, I totally misread that. I brought in players that were good NASL players. I brought in players that I thought their experience would be too much to handle for many young Canadian athletes that have no professional experience in the game, which was a lot of players in the CPL year one, a lot of university players, right? And Ontario League One players and whatnot, players at that level. So I figured that, this core group of veterans I had brought back in would just be a bit too much, and we would find success doing this when combining with the young Edmonton player that I wanted to then also add into that mix. So I misread the league right from day one, and I signed some contracts to players that made my life difficult in 2020 in PEI, and not to blame the players on this at all. But, when you've done a job and you've already misread the league, the level of play, and you've got players locked in for 2 years, you can't make many changes in your second year as well. So it was going to be always, I knew this was going to be a longer process for me to get it right. And year three, which I never got to, unfortunately, because year three for me, all through PEI, all through the preparations for PEI. Year 3 for me was the year that I knew I could turn everything around, because I left us. We were probably the club that was in the best shape as far as salary cap. We only had 2 players that were into a contract for that upcoming year. So a lot of flexibility to make, necessary changes. And that being said, though, at the end of the day, as I admitted in PEI, I was probably one of those necessary changes myself. So the new manager, I always thought, would come into this amazing situation in year 3 because they had unlimited cap space to build the roster of their choosing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned because the first few years, even as again a kind of an observer of the league, we were noticing a lot of 1-year deals, and it was like there was that hesitation to commit. And I can remember a lot of us talking about, wow, that FC Edmonton really has that belief, right, and that creating that core. But there's also the risk side of that, right? So if it doesn't work out, it's harder to get rid of someone. So it's interesting you sharing that.
There's that, and I think it's also how you want to approach people. And I think, again, and this is where I say I was a really great assistant coach with Colin Miller, because I was the guy that was able to go to every player, put my arm around them, lift them up if they weren't getting playing time, make them feel better, and be that, but really care about the athlete. And I think that, these 1-year deals are tough. They're tough on these young kids because they're getting a chance at a very low salary. You're asking them to give up a year of their life, and then if you don't pick them up or whatnot. So for me to bring in players, for me to bring in my international players, I wanted to give them a home for 2 years. I didn't want to just use players. And not to say coaches are doing it now. I'm not throwing out any blame or criticism to anybody else. That was just my philosophy. I wanted players to have a place that was guaranteed, a place where they, especially, Ramon came here with his wife. I wanted him to have a home. I don't want him to have to, move every year because of these 1-year deals, which I think, are not really fair for a lot of these kids. So that's the route that I went. And hey, I'm the one that's unemployed in the CPL. So I guess the other ones did it right. But I still stand by what I did, to be fair.
And that's really interesting to hear that you stuck with your philosophy. There's no regrets there. You did your best shot. And, I have a sense, that these opportunities, like you mentioned, you continue to work, these opportunities come back around, right? So you never know what might happen next. But when you did step down, did you have a plan of what you were going to do next? Was Edmonton Scottish kind of, you'd worked with them in the past, you'd mentioned a few times. So did you kind of feel like you had a place to go? You had more work to do?
Yeah, I actually had the Edmonton Scottish, that my going there as a technical director, that was arranged and set up before I left PE. So I knew I was going to that. When I got back home, it was already a done deal. Very thankful to Edmonton Scottish, at the time, for the conversations and, for providing me my next step. Yeah, but that I knew that. PEI was, when I went on air a few times in PEI and kind of said my piece, and I always tried to be honest in the CPL. I always tried to, in interviews, just be who I am. And I wasn't always appreciated by the higher ups in the CPL. I speak my voice, and I wasn't their favorite for it, but I'd rather be honest, and I'd rather be, critical of things that I see are not being done right. But I was honest then. And so, yeah, when I had my job lined up before I got off the plane.
So for those who aren't familiar with Edmonton Scottish, because there's a few of us who aren't as familiar, especially Winnipeg, I had to go look up at the website, and I was like, oh, wow, this is really established. A lot of programming going on here. Tell us a little bit about Edmonton Scottish and what they do for the soccer community there.
Yeah, historic club, especially at the senior level, men's and women's. The Angels are part of the Edmonton Scottish, brand. And of course, with Stuart Brown many years ago, the Edmonton Angels are a Hall of Fame club program. Stuart Brown, as well as is a Canadian Hall of Fame, manager. They've put out players like Janine Helen, for example, who now works for the club as the director of female programming. So really important club as far as that senior amateur level, and really having some top players come through there, especially on the female side. Many years ago, when the female game was still growing, it was one of the biggest programs in the country. But it's now there's 1,000 youth players that play at Scottish, all programming from U4 right up to the what we call the AYSL. So that's our high performance league. So a club that has its national youth license, along with St. Albert Shire Park as well in Edmonton. So standards-based club. But again, they're, a big impact, of course, is we have a dome, and it's the largest indoor playing surface in Canada. That's under a dome. So massive, full field, 399 pitches. So it's just really become a very important, organization here in Alberta, certainly, and probably Western Canada, for its growth in the game, for what it wants to give to the game, for the history of its senior programming.
It's really interesting you mentioned the dome too, because it's something that I think Canadian fans across the league, maybe not so much in the Toronto area, but finding those indoor spaces to be able to play during the winter has always been tough, especially when you don't want to play on an indoor rink with the ice boards up, right? Like it's
Right.
it's something that's very unique for sure.
Yeah.
Edmonton Scottish wise, what kind of your favorite memories would you pick out from your time with Edmonton Scottish? Was there any sort of players or relationships or moments that kind of stick out in your mind with your time throughout your time at Edmonton Scottish?
Right now, it's these 2011 boys that I work with. Quite honestly, this will be a group of kids that will always stay with me. Just they're incredible. I mean, the football these kids play and the way that they're playing right now. When you watch them play, they look like they're 17-year-olds as far as their understanding of the game of football, the way they move a ball around, they use their space. And it's not about winning for us. I mean, the young kids never lose, but we never talk about that. We talk about how you play. Every game's a performance, and then every game we challenge ourselves versus the last game. And these kids have brought back, because I didn't want to coach again. When I left FC Edmonton, I was going to get into the administrative side of the game. I love project building. I love building something. And Edmonton gave me that chance, of course, with the CPL and our academy many years before that. And Scottish gave me the chance to really start to build a program there. But I didn't want to coach anymore. I was done. And then I was handed this team through circumstance, and they restored a passion for being on the grass and being with players. So I'm so thankful for these 10-year-old kids, for really saving my mind a bit. Yeah, so that'll be the moment. These group of boys for sure.
So you talk a little bit about the amazing kind of skills you're seeing with kids these days. Have you seen a transition in Canadian soccer from your time maybe at the beginning of your career to now in terms of the way we train players? And is there something that we could be doing better in terms of our path to pro nationally? Like what are your thoughts on those kinds of things?
Yeah, so a big difference, I think, number one, in the quality of coaching. And I think you have more and more clubs now that are putting less an emphasis on winning, because at the youngest ages, it's destroyed player development in this country. Not that you can't win. Winning is actually a very good thing, and it's healthy for sure. We want to create kids that like winning and are used to it. But if that's the end all be all, then you're going to forget about actually giving players the skills required to play at a higher level than Canadian club youth. That's changing slowly, but I'm seeing a change there. I'm seeing kids that are more savvy now. I'm seeing kids that are, again, I think our biggest weakness in the game here is just a lack of understanding of what to do when you don't have the ball. I've always believed that. We're starting to see this change. We're starting to see kids that can recognize their off-the-ball movements and support, whether it's attacking or defending. So I think that's been a drastic change. And part of that goes to maybe a lessening of the emphasis on winning. So I think there's some nice changes there. I think the adoption of a national youth club license, which affords these youth clubs that qualify for that license with Canada Soccer. So now all those players in those clubs count as domestic or homegrown players in the MLS. I think that's a caveat. I think that's a carrot. But it holds these clubs to standards, including the clubs that I'm involved with. It holds you to a standard. And there's governance standards there on how the board runs. There's facility standards. There's coaching standards. And I think this has been a big change. So way different than when I was young growing up and you were just being yelled at by an old, Scottish coach or an old British coach in Toronto. And it was all about running and exercise and being fit than it was. You had more of that than you had on the ball. It's reversed. So a big change. And I think as far as now, how do we continue to advance? But I think the CPL actually has a role to play in this. And they are. I mean, they're helping create these, Ontario League One, which they own. I know they've helped kind of establish BC League One. Hopefully we'll get a Central League One here in the Prairies. We need it. So, yeah, but I think the CPL, and this is going to be, you'll love this take, I'm sure, but so I've always fought against the under 21 rule because I don't think it's young enough. I want to see a U19 rule in the CPL. If the CPL is really intent on driving young Canadian players, if it's intent on creating a second economic or another economic model for owners about selling players, and we've seen now some success, well, then get these players in and get them playing minutes at that level sooner. So why shouldn't it be U19? U21 still allows university athletes to come in and eat up those minutes when they're not full-time pros. A 19-year-old eating up those minutes has probably made a choice to be a full-time pro, and there's a difference there for me. So, and I value the U-Sport programming. I value that program. I think it's great, but I'm still referring to the 18-year-old athlete that's made a decision that they want to be a professional footballer. They do all over the world. Well, then great. Get those players minutes. So U21 is not good enough for me. Should be U19. And then also, I think the emphasis should be, because I know we've got the under 23 domestic rule or international program. We've yet to, since the program started, it's great. We've got this idea that we're going to bring in these international players that are under 23 that are coming from Europe. And then for some reason, we're going to develop them here in Canada and sell them back to the places that already didn't want to sign them. Doesn't make sense to me. Never did. Let's focus on the young Canadians, because what we've seen so far in the CPL is it's the young Canadians who are being sold. It's not the international players anymore. It's actually Canadian kids, because we're like the almost, we're one of the last frontiers for player development, where players now right to become a soccer hotbed. So this is where I think the CPL has a big role to play.
Makes a lot of sense too. And if you're thinking about, advantages of the Canadian Premier League from just a third-party scouting, there's a lot of information available on these players. The data is available. And so seeing some of these young Canadians moving over, most recently, one of the players from Calgary got sold to Ross.
Victor Latour. Yeah.
Very, very cool, right? And here in Winnipeg, we're holding our breath that Okio is not going as well, but that's the rumor, right? And
right.
On the one side, you're thinking, it's too bad for my club. But on the other hand, this is the purpose of the league. You want to have these opportunities and provide these. You got to be excited for these guys to have that opportunity and go out and take that next step. So I completely agree. There are guys who are 2021 who eat up a lot of minutes who may not be the target of those kind of scouting reports or scouts from other places. So that's very cool that you shared that. Thank you. Yeah. In terms of what we're seeing with the top level men's and women's teams and nationally in Canada, it's a very exciting time. Obviously, both the women coming off the Olympic gold medal, and then you have the men who are obviously qualified for the World Cup, and that's become a massive story in its own. What do we have to do to keep this momentum going in terms of the development of players in Canada? Is obviously Canadian Premier League needs to grow. We want that clear path. We want that standardization. But is there other things that are missing from our kind of development path?
Well, so the Canadian Division 3, which is the League Ones right now, PLSQ, Ontario League 1, BC League 1. Let's expand that, which I know the CPL is interested in doing. So the CPL has been great. I don't always agree with things. I'm never saying they're wrong. I just have a disagreement in some things. I would do it differently. That's all. But they've been really important at growing the importance of these tier 3, Division 3 type leagues. So we need the expansion of those into the Maritimes and into Central Canada, so the Prairies. That's one step. Then the next step for me would be to then organically grow from those programs, organically grow a Division 2. Don't create it. Don't make it false. Don't let people just buy a spot in. Let the top clubs in these regions find their way into something like that, right? The clubs that have a stadium already, the clubs that have a facility, training centers, that governance-wise are doing it properly. Let's let those become the Div 2 teams. And again, they'll filter out from the tier 3. So let that happen. And then I think we need the expansion of the high performance leagues, but we need to create a stronger scouting network for this. We need to create a stronger cross Canada type competition for them. So there needs to be a reason for kids to go into this, to go into high performance. It's more expensive for kids. So why would they pay more money? So let's find a way to make that truly the spot for top athletes across the country, not just in pockets and regions. So there's that. And then the piece that I've always said from day one is just that corporate sponsorship, corporate buy-in, media buy-in to soccer in general. And yes, I know we fight for it in the CPL and we want more recognition, but this is across the country. I mean, there's more athletes that play our sport than any other sport except for swimming in our country. So it's amazing to me. Well, maybe now with all the stuff about hockey, and I won't get into that, but maybe now maybe Canadian Tire comes over to soccer now. We'll see. But yeah, so those are the couple things for me, I think, that will keep driving the game forward.
Here's a question for you, and this is purely kind of out of my own interest in, watching other countries' systems, the way that they handle their clubs. Do you ever see promotion relegation existing in this country?
No, I don't.
Yeah, but I do like your idea of the second tier should be defined by the clubs who belong there instead of
don't buy in. Yeah, don't buy in, because that's, again, and this is why though, because that buy-in, this is exactly why I don't believe we'll ever see promotion relegation. How could you have an MLS owner who paid $300 million for their franchise, and that's all they are, is franchises at the end of the day, like the CPL? How can someone pay $300 million and then be relegated to someone who paid $3 million for their franchise? It just makes no sense. And then plus, again, the $300 million franchisee owners, well, they're also in 20,000 plus seat stadiums. So you all of a sudden go down a level, you can no longer afford that stadium. It'd actually kill the game. You would see team after team folding, most likely. So the system was set up to be franchises, like all the other North American sports, and because of that, I just don't believe you'll ever see it.
It's always that one question that's in the forefront of a lot of people's minds, so I always like asking it. But the reality is,
that's well for me. That's why I see it. The reality is, yes, I'd love to see it, especially again. Take FC Edmonton, something I know very well is being near the bottom of the table, in the CPL. Those games become a lot more meaningful for players. So in 2019, we had a good run in 2019 during the middle of the season. We went 11 games, we only lost 1 in 11. We had some ties in there, but when it became, we had a weekend, we drew in Calgary and then we lost in Winnipeg. And I don't know why we couldn't beat Winnipeg that year, by the way, because I thought we were better, but we never did beat you. Weird. So actually, no, I'm lying. We won the first game. We actually.
I was going to say you guys the first game, guys.
The first game.
That was our. Whenever we met you first game, we'd lose. It was sort of a kind of a tradition for us. We broke it this year.
Yeah, but so the end of that year though. So after we had that really positive run, and I could have kept us playing. We were playing in a 4-4-2, which is not a system that I'm a fan of, to be honest. But it enabled us to sit back in a low to medium block, be very difficult to be scored on, which we were during that good run. Look to counterattack, which we did well. I mean, we beat Forge a couple games doing just that, keeping them from playing inside. We could have kept doing that, but once we had that really poor weekend, and that kind of at that point was like, okay, we're out of this. Like, we're not going to be one of the two teams, obviously, playing for a championship. I went back to a 4-3-3 to prepare for the next year. And then, of course, when I did that, we went 10 games without a win. We tied a bunch, but we went 10 games without a win. If we had promotion relegation, I wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
I was able to do that. Now, of course, you wouldn't, and you wouldn't. So I think that, again, we have to be careful what we ask for, because a lot of these young players that we see now are developing, coming through, are doing that because coaches can do that, because typically your job's not so much on the line in a league that doesn't have relegation.
No, that makes total sense. Kind of a last question for you, because I appreciate all the time you've taken today, Jeff. This has been a fantastic conversation. I don't know if you're a reader, but I'm guessing you might be based on kind of your education. But what are you reading right now? I always like to kind of pick on what people's brains. So what are you reading now, or what have you read lately that you'd recommend? Football or not?
What I'm reading right now is actually Raymond Varian's latest book. So Raymond Varian is, for me, a game changer in football theory, football coaching. I've taken his online courses for the last year as well, and he's just, he sees the game in a way that the game is altogether not segmented into different little pieces. So that's what I'm reading. Yeah, that's Raymond Varian's latest book. It's usually a soccer book for me, to be fair. Yeah, I've got a couple online for the summer though, but it's either that or a leadership book.
Very nice. Very appropriate. Right on point.
I'm quite boring, predictable, I guess.
Oh, not boring at all. Not at all. World Cup. I always ask, because I love asking, what are your thoughts on Canada's group, and how do you think we're going to do come winter?
Yeah, it's a tough group. So you'd hope that we can beat Morocco. Yep. I think that Belgium, you hope to just stay in the game, quite honestly. And then Croatia could be a toss-up, because I think that Canada's strengths actually lend well to Croatia's weaknesses. And I think that our pace could be a bit much on the counterattack for Croatia. It's a team that's kind of, near the end of their player cycle with that group of players. So that'll be an interesting one. Of course, the quality of Croatia is massive and the depth is massive. But again, we're so young and quick. Yeah, that could be an interesting game for us. If we can keep ourselves in that into the second half with a chance, then I think we have a chance.
It's a very tough group, but it could have been tougher. And it's one of those things where I totally agree that our pace, our counter is going to be something that hopefully surprises some of these teams. Maybe they won't give it as much credence as they think, but they will. Yeah. They'll be prepared, I'm sure.
Listen, John Herbin you've never met anybody more organized and detailed as this man. It's actually, it's quite something. So they'll be ready for every game. There'll be no surprises for his players.
Well, thank you very much today for having a chat with me, Jeff. I really do appreciate your time. So Jeff Paulus, current technical director and upcoming head coach, I guess, back at, what did you call it? It was NAIT, N-A-I-T. Northern Alberta Institute for Technology. So we'll be looking forward to seeing you back out coaching again. And it's great to hear that you found that spark. Those kids got you back into loving it again. So that's really good to hear. But thank you so much for your time, Jeff.
Yeah,
and,
thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll chat again soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Yeah, listen, thanks for this, by the way. Yeah, it's appreciated. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Scoot Talk Sports. It's a real pleasure to be part of your day. You can listen to all previous episodes by searching for Scoot Talk Sports on your favorite podcast app. Scoot Talk Sports is recorded live on Twitch Sports, and you can be part of the audience. Follow me at twitch.tv/scooter. That's twitch.tv/SCOOTR. You can also keep up to date with new episodes, discussion, and other content by connecting with me on Twitter. Twitter.com/_SCOOTR. You can find all the ways to connect with me using the link in my Twitter profile. Until the next episode, much love and have a good one.